The Giants will visit the Bucs on Monday Night Football in Week 11 on November 22nd, following their bye week. These two teams also met on Monday Night Football last season at MetLife Stadium, with Tampa Bay winning 25-23. The Bucs went 11-5 in 2020 and beat the Chiefs 31-9 in the Super Bowl. So, to get more into what to expect from the Bucs this season, we are now joined by John Ledyard, who covers the team for Pewter Report, also does a great job covering the NFL Draft. John, you got Lance Medow and Paul Dottino here on Giants.com, Big Blue Kickoff Live. Greatly appreciate the time today. Hope all is well. How are things on your end?
Things are great. You know, we are loving the Tampa Bay area. We've been there about 7 months now, and right now we are back up in PA for a few weeks, wedding and some other things we got to do. So it's good that we're getting a little bit of PA in the summertime, which is when it's at its best. So, yeah, we're enjoying life right now.
Absolutely. Well, that is good to hear. And as you know, we are inching closer to training camp. That's why it will heat up across the board in the National Football League. But we want to focus, of course, today on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And I think by far, John, the biggest storyline maybe is not even X's and O's for this team. It's more about what this front office was able to pull off in bringing back all 22 starters in the salary cap era. What has impressed you the most about the ability to keep a Super Bowl team intact, which, as you can attest to, is very challenging to do based on recent history?
I think it's the fact that everybody's so bought in on the concept of team. You don't actually get that. You hear it all the time, but you don't actually get it very often, especially at the NFL, the professional level. Understandably so, guys. You're concerned about their livelihood and making the most out of their opportunity to shine and be in a platform and get deals off of that, advertising deals, things, all of those kind of things. You know, I get it completely. This is just a rare situation where I really think that winning Super Bowl is like the most important thing to like 90% of these dudes. Like, it really is. And they've shown it. It's not just talk, but they've shown it. I mean, Shaq Barrett said the other day on Good Morning Football, I think he said he literally didn't even listen to offers. I mean, he signed with the Bucs right after free agency opened a couple minutes after. Like, he said he didn't really even pay attention to their offers. He told his agent he always wanted to be back in Tampa Bay. That was it. And so, you know, he doesn't really even know what else was out there when he's been asked about it. You know, that's just crazy. I mean, he's a top pass rusher on the market, a position of value. He definitely could have gotten more somewhere else if he had waited. I'm sure he got that advice from Drew Rosenhaus, and, you know, he chose to stay and to stick it out. And that's been the sentiment with a lot of guys coming back. You know, Leonard Fournette coming back to Tampa, Antonio Brown coming back to Tampa. I think that those guys want to win, and they feel like this is a special team, and on paper it certainly is.
You know, John, there hasn't been a repeat Super Bowl champion now since 04 and 05 with the New England Patriots. And one of the reasons that people usually cite for that is that there's so much hoopla and so much, you know, off-the-field stuff that happens when you win that Lombardi trophy. But because of the pandemic this past year and a half, I got a feeling that most of that stuff was muted. Is that something the Bucs can use to their advantage?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you know, there's a lot of factors, obviously, but, you know, I think that with the pandemic, it definitely, I mean, the league spotlight's still on the Bucs, obviously. Like, there's still obviously a lot of interest on the Bucs nationally because of Brady's presence there and everything. So there are outside distractions, but yeah, it's certainly, I mean, no open locker room, there's not as many opportunities for, you know, quote unquote distractions to seep in. And so there's the opportunity for the team. Yeah, I think to focus and rally around a common goal, and they've got to find ways too to become close knit in the midst of all those stipulations. And obviously a lot of those will be eased this year, hopefully. But yeah, I think that there's definitely opportunity there for them to be able to use those things to their advantage too, especially in a year like this one where the media might get, you know, he still might have some protocols in place, but the guys within the team, hopefully, if they're about vaccinated, then maybe they are able to eat meals together and things like that weren't able to happen last year.
John, you look at last season, they lose to the Chiefs in Week 12, then they have the bye, and they go on an 8-game winning streak. The rest is history. I think a lot of people looking back at the team last year would say this team progressively got more and more comfortable and got better, and I'm specifically focusing on the offensive side of the ball as they had more and more games on the field together. So if that's the case, what are you expecting as they now enter this season, and how much better could they start this year compared to where they were at this time last year?
I think they can start a lot better. I think they can even start better than they finished last year. You know, even in the Super Bowl, as good as that performance was, offensively, you know, there was a lot of shoot-yourself-in-the-foot moments that you're like, man, this team really could have put up just 40 with ease. Like, if, you know, I mean, I think just even at the end of the game, they missed 2 touchdowns on like their last try. I think they ended up kicking a field goal maybe on it, or But yeah, they're, Tanner Hudson runs the wrong route. Chris Godwin, they have wide open for a touchdown, a wheel route. Ali Marpet gets beat. That never happens. Brady gets hit as he throws, and they miss a touchdown. Stuff like that. It's like, all right, there's still a higher ceiling here for everybody if we can get up people on the same page and everybody executing. And so, you're always going to have some missed opportunities at times, but it felt like they put up 30 points a game without even really being at their best. So it's pretty scary to think about what they can be. Everyone regresses, injuries happen. Nothing's the same quite year to year typically, but I definitely think they have the ability to be even better. It took a while with injuries. The first half of the season or more was kind of a little bit shot with Chris Godwin missing over 4 games, and he's kind of the feature guy in the offense. They had to have other guys step up, and not everybody was totally ready for a big role like that yet. And Mike Evans was playing a vertical, hard-running receiver role with one leg, and it was just like there were a lot of frustrations, I think, early on in the season. So the hope is that they can get through training camp healthy and that they can hit the ground running in week 1 against the Dallas secondary that's pretty weak on paper.
John, from that Super Bowl, the one thing that was so obvious is that they dominated both sides of the trenches and absolutely beat the living stuffing out of the Kansas City Chiefs. So what I need to ask you is this, because I thought going into the season that offensive line had a lot of improving to do, and I wasn't so sure that Brady was going to be able to last the season. But lo and behold, not only did they hold up, they held up extremely well. So how likely is it that both sides of the trenches will be able to pick up just where they left off at the end of last year?
I think it's pretty likely for the Bucs offensive line because you have 3 of the best players in the league at their position, I think, and Ali Marpet at left guard, Ryan Jensen at center, and Tristan Wirfs at right tackle. Donovan Smith has gotten better really every single year he's been in the league. It's been this kind of slow, gradual climb from disappointing to like an above average, solid left tackle. That's probably a ceiling, but I think that's where we've gotten to at this point.
What do they feed him, John? Because he just wasn't any good before this.
Right, I know. It's the new regime has helped for sure. I think the last 2 years have been his best 2 years. Even the beginning of last year, though, he struggled, and then he just plays his best football down the stretch, and maybe a little bit of that's the magic of the run, and it happens. Things go your way, and he could regress a little bit next season. But it's interesting that he's kind of consistently just gotten a little bit better each year, a little bit more consistent. He has always been somebody who works really hard, and he's very tough. Like he played the Chiefs game. He showed up to the stadium that day, the Week 12 game, and he showed up in a boot to that game, and he wasn't going to play. And then he was like, you know what, I just think my guys need me. And so he ended up playing that whole game after arriving to the stadium in a boot, and they had no expectation he was going to play. So, he is a tough dude, and I think everybody respects that. And as he's gotten some coaches who understand him a little bit better, I think he's responded better to that coaching. And then Alex Kappa, right guard, is just an unbelievable story. I mean, talk about going to Humboldt State and coming to the NFL and your body's not ready at all, and you have this terrible rookie season when you do play, which is sparingly, and then you're okay your second season. And then last year, I mean, he was just physically transformed, technically, mentally tough. He's never going to be a great athlete. There's not a high ceiling here, but he has made himself into a starting quality right guard in the NFL. And big year, he's going to hit the free agent market, and he's going to be well paid as a starter type of player because that's how he is. So I think offensive line, trajectory's pointing up. All those guys should be as good or better next year. No reason to think age will take anybody just yet. Pretty young group, really talented group. Defensive line, you have some question marks because Vea, I think, is the one guy he's going to need to be around all year next year, I think. They need to be healthy and need to be a force all 3 downs. Can he stay on the field all the time? He did a pretty good job of that last year before his injury. And then after coming back, he does a good job of that. But, you have the 2 oldest defensive tackles in the league, and Ndamukong Suh and Steve McClendon on this team. So as good as those guys are and as unbelievable as those guys' conditioning is, and Suh's never missed a game in his career except due to suspension. That is just bonkers. Those guys are still going to be at that point age-wise where you need to start taking some reps off of them, and they're not really effective pass rushers. And even Will Golston's getting up there in age, too. He's on the wrong side of 30 now. So you've got an older interior defensive line that could be somewhat of a concern. Jason Pierre-Paul's injury history last year playing through injury, somewhat of a concern. You drafted Joe Tryon, smart, get a guy in the hopper, but he hasn't played football since 2019. So D-line, they've been the number 1 run defense in the league the last 2 years, but there's some question marks. I think they have good players. There's just some question marks due to age and injury stuff, I think, that could catch up with them eventually.
We're talking with John Ledyard, who covers the Tampa Bay Buccaneers for Pewter Report. And, John, you brought up the run game, and I want to switch back to the offensive side of the ball because as you were talking about the progress of the offensive line, I think an element that was in play last year, which we hadn't necessarily seen in previous years, was the establishment of the run game, especially in the postseason. Now, you have Ronald Jones, you have Leonard Fournette, but they also bring in Giovanni Bernard in free agency. They drafted Keyshawn Vaughn in the third round last year. I guess it's a good thing that you have some depth and you have some options, but it's maybe a bit of a headache right now to try to figure out how exactly the carries are going to be distributed this season. So how do you see this backfield playing out in 2021?
It's a great question. If I had the answer, I'd be on every fantasy podcast and might even hire me, because this is the question everybody wants to know every year with Bruce Arians. Like, who is he going to play running back? Will he actually predominantly play anyone? There was a time when it was David Johnson. Even then, I think people were frustrated anybody else got carries in those situations, like Andre Ellington or whatever. But that's the question everybody wants to know with Bruce every year, and I don't think it's going to be any different than any other year. Everybody's going to play. There will be games where they're losing or where they end up in a lot of 2-minute type situations for whatever reason at the end of a half or game, and Giovanni Bernard's going to play more of that game than any other game, or they just feel like there's no point in running. These teams, everybody's playing, bringing a guy down in the box. We're just going to throw all day until they get out of it, and the Giovanni Bernard's going to play a ton. He's one of the best pass protecting backs in the league and one of the best pass catching backs in the league. That is just a complete skill set they didn't have last year. They didn't even have guys who could run screen passes. I mean, that's how bad it was at times last year. It took all year for the simple screens to just get underway. The guys couldn't catch. Guys didn't know where their landmarks were, couldn't read their blocks, weren't patient enough. It was just a mess. Ronald Jones and Leonard Fournette just are no good in the passing game, really. So having Giovanni Bernard is huge. Bruce Arians always gravitated toward backs that can catch and protect. That, to me, I think Giovanni Bernard is going to end up playing more than people think he is when push comes to shove. The Arians will come in with the plan to play everybody, and I think Giovanni Bernard's going to end up playing a lot for this team. In terms of who carries the ball the most, I do think it's going to be Ronald Jones. He is definitely the most talented back. I don't think anybody really has much question about that. The struggle, I think, becomes Ronald Jones' mental. He has some issues there. Like, he'll drop the ball. He won't know where to be on a certain play. He'll miss the handoff or go the wrong. He has those kind of hiccups. That's the stuff you don't want a running back that's derailing that stuff on a team that's talented. So if he gets into those problems, you'll see more Leonard Fournette, I think. Right now, I think Fournette might end up being the odd guy out, but if they get sick and frustrated with Ronald Jones, he'll be right back in there, and at some point it's going to be a straw that breaks the camel's back with Jones, and they might just wash their hands of it and play Fournette the rest of the way.
John, I guess I got to ask about the elephant in the room. At what point does Tom Brady wake up and realize he's going to be 44 years old in September, and you're not supposed to be playing this well?
Yeah, that is the thing, Paul. I mean, obviously Tom Brady's, he looked unbelievable last year, and physically he seems fine, and I watched him throw the ball in minicamp, and I'm like, yeah, this dude's totally fine. I don't know, physically just is unbelievable. But the reality of age still exists. It doesn't go away because Brady's defied it for a longer period of time. It's still going to catch up. It catches up with every single player. I don't know if it'll be this year. I don't. But that's probably the big X factor, right? As silly as it seems after the guy has the type of season he did last year, you've still got to think about it because logically, that does happen. It will happen with him. It's if he keeps playing long enough, and here he is about to play another year. So we probably have to ask that every year, and really even going into the playoffs, as well as he might play in the regular season, is that going to happen? But yeah, I don't think it's happened yet based on anything I've seen. He may be one of the rare cases of a guy that retires, and it never does happen. But I still think it's fair to ask the question going into every year. We may not be able to break it down or show anything that indicates that it's going to happen because we've never seen a guy play this late and this good into his career. So we might not have any evidence, but I think it's still a question worth asking as you kind of think about what the possible outcomes are for Brady, going into what'll be, his 22nd season.
Well, I think at least the one element that protects him, perhaps, from showing his age, John, is the talent around him. I don't think anybody's going to dispute with what he's working with, and that brings us to the receiving core. We know what Mike Evans could do. We know what Chris Godwin could do. We saw what Scotty Miller can do, and you referenced those guys earlier. I'm curious because I think this year's theme is more about, to your point, if they suffer injuries in the early stage of the season or at some point, do they feel good about who's playing on the back end that could come in and fill in? So you had Tyler Johnson, who was drafted last year, who showed some flashes. They bring in Jalen Darden in the 4th round this year out of North Texas. What's your impressions, John, of wide receiver 4, 5, 6, and so forth, that when some of the starters have to miss a game or two, that the level of production maybe won't dip as much as we anticipate?
Yeah, that's probably the deepest wide receiver room and the best wide receiver room in the league. It's rare to find those two things together, but I think they have that. I mean, Scotty Miller was leading this team at midseason last year in receiving yards because Mike Evans was playing hurt, even though he played every game, he was playing hurt, and Chris Godwin also had missed like over 4 games. And so he was the leading receiver, and he was having a great year. He had 4 70-plus yard receiving games in the first 8 games of the year and was coming off a 100-yard game. Then Antonio Brown plays week 9, and they add him, and that's his first game. And then Scotty Miller didn't do anything until the Minnesota game. He wasn't healthy either, but he's out there playing. He just barely did anything. So, I mean, they're barely using this guy. He played 8 snaps against Minnesota. One of them was a 48-yard touchdown that changed the entire season for the team. Same thing in playoffs. He barely plays, but he gets his touchdown before the half against Green Bay. He catches a huge big passing play, 29-yarder in the Saints game between 2 players, down the field. So, I mean, vertical threat, per play impact, it's hard not to list Scotty Miller on the top 20 most important Bucs going into this season, and he's your 4th receiver. That's crazy. I mean, you're not even talking about, you're listening to top 20 Bucs. One of those guys on that list is the number 4 receiver. I just don't think any other team can say that about their number 4 receiver. And he's going to probably split time with Tyler Johnson if Johnson is able to improve on special teams. He flashed a lot last year. He made a huge 3rd down catch against the Saints in the playoffs, one against the Packers. And so, I mean, he's another guy he's going to have a hard time getting a hat on game days. And I think they might view him as the potential plan B if Chris Godwin doesn't re-sign long term. I mean, that's the range you have here. You're a guy that could be your Godwin replacement next year if you lose him. Might not even be active on game days just because if Jalen Darden's the return guy, there's your 5, count Scotty and obviously A.B. Evans and Godwin. And so, if you're going to address the 6th receiver, he's got to be able to play on special teams. And so that's where Johnson's going to have to make his mark. But those are your top 6 for sure. And then you've got Jaden Mickens, who played well last year and was a good return guy. He had some great kickoff returns in the Super Bowl. He's the guy that everybody in that locker room loves. Has taken Jalen Darden under his wing, despite the fact that he knows that's the guy that's going to take his roster spot. He's been unbelievable in that regard. I mean, you've Justin Watson, who's a key special teamer for them, has played well when they've had to use him at wide receiver. So it's a great group, no question about it. The tight end room is incredible as well. I mean, Cam Brate was one of their key players down the stretch, and it's hard to figure out how he gets onto the field next year. So definitely have the depth at those positions for guys to be able to step up and play if need be.
John, let's stick with the passing game. Is this the year that Rob Gronkowski decides to play second fiddle, or does O.J. Howard totally explode and put up huge numbers?
Probably neither of those things happen in terms of huge numbers for O.J., but I really feel strongly about O.J.'s potential. I think he would have had a great year last year if he hadn't gotten hurt. Tom Brady loves O.J. Howard. I mean, he thinks he's everything. I mean, he really does. I mean, he's so I think he was one of the pieces that made Brady want to come over, honestly, like being able to see, if we can get Gronk, and then if we have this guy as our number 2 tight end, Brady's always loved that position, obviously, and I think they've never really recaptured the Hernandez-Gronkowski magic in New England, so I think he was kind of looking for options at that position and found 3 of them, obviously, in Tampa Bay that he really enjoys, and so I think O.J. Howard's going to have a really good year, if he's fully healthy. I think he's going to have a really good year. I just don't know that monster numbers in this offense. Probably tough to come by. Gronkowski's, people don't talk enough about how he's staved off age and injury. Brady's had to stave off age, but Gronkowski's had injuries. And the fact that he was able to be as good as he was, I mean, he led the league last year at the tight end position in deep targets, 20-plus air yards or more, and in deep catches, eight of them. He had more than Kelsey or Darren Waller did last year. He has somehow just remained an unbelievable vertical threat at that position, despite not being anywhere close to even a 4.5 40 guy. He has that build-up speed, and his contested catch ability is still the best in the league, at that position. So, he has traits that just will not go away. They just win in today's NFL, and you factor in his blocking in the pass game especially. He's just a huge asset for them. I think it's still being undersold how important he was to this team last season, and I think he'll be very important to them this year as well.
John, as a follow-up to that, and I actually want to connect this to the Giants, I find it interesting. O.J. Howard and Evan Engram both entering the 5th and final years of their rookie contracts. They were part of the same draft class. Both players have dealt with some injuries. Now, you mentioned that you're pretty high on Howard having a productive season this year, and the Giants brought in Kyle Rudolph. I'm just curious, how critical do you think this season is for both players, at least from a contractual standpoint, for each of their teams to determine whether or not they want to invest in them beyond the rookie contract?
I think it's huge. Howard's context of his situation will have to be taken into account by anyone. If he's able to produce, a 600-yard season, 6-touchdown season, and stay healthy all 16 games, make some big plays, make some noise in the playoffs. That position is just so lean in today's NFL. I still think he gets, an offer, an opportunity. What's crazy about both of those guys is, Howard, he was supposed to be a blocker, right? That's what he was at Alabama, and he's really not been a great blocker. He's okay, he's fine. He's better than Engram, obviously, but Engram was supposed to be like a bad blocker, but an unbelievable receiver, and he can't catch the ball. And so there's kind of just a lot of frustration in both fan bases with both guys, but I still think the league thinks they're both incredibly talented. Howard is probably the bigger concern because of the health. That's the league won't care if he's talented if he can't stay on the field this year. So it's a bigger year for him because he's got to stay on the field, I think. Engram, whether we like it or not, he's got the Pro Bowl in his back pocket. Somebody liked him, obviously. Some coaches and players around the league voted for him. So, he is – I loved Engram coming out. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I think, to be honest, I think a different situation could be huge for him. Maybe it is the right place. Maybe just need another year with this group and we'll see a better player. But he's another player that I think – his skill set is too intriguing to me not to take a chance on him somewhere else from another team. We've seen a lot of late bloomers at tight end in the NFL. I think of Jared Cook as like a shining example of a guy who just drove people crazy forever. Delaney Walker was, just a guy for a while, and then he, blossomed into something. Even Kittle was nothing in college, a non-factor, a late round pick, and then he blows up. Kelsey wasn't even a tight end, So, I mean, there's just a long history of guys that kind of figured it out and had all the talent, just kind of figured it out and finally put it all together. It's a tough position, and I think those guys could be headed that way.
John, we touched a little bit on defense earlier, but we really never got into Devin White, who is now entering his third year, and I don't know how much more upside there can be because he was spectacular last season.
Yeah, it was such an interesting year for Devin White. The perceptions about him are just kind of all over the place. Those who watched him early in the season and through the first half of the year, really, especially the Week 9 game against the Saints where they just got blown up. I mean, he just was so rough in that game. Just coverage, just couldn't not make a play. Man coverage, just so overeager, and his technique was awful. But you're still looking at a guy that has all the talent in the world. He's so physical. He's so big and fast and aggressive and smart. And it's just like, does it all come together? And then, he late in the season, last couple weeks of the regular season, he started really flashing a lot, and competition was weak, and you wondered if that was part of it. And then in the playoffs, he gets COVID and he's out for the Washington game, and then he comes back in the Saints game, and it's one of the best linebacker games I've ever seen. I mean, watching that tape of that game is just incredible. He's everywhere. It's like he knew every play. It was marvelous to watch, and that he was great against Green Bay, great against Kansas City, obviously, and it was like, oh man, I don't know what to think of this guy now. He might actually be worth the 5th overall pick. And so I think he's his base is like a good player now. I think he could be the best linebacker in the league, though. We're talking about an unbelievable talent. I mean, you don't see the combination of size, speed, and athleticism, aggressiveness with a player like that who gets it mentally too. You just don't see that very often. So I think that there's a special ceiling for him. It's such a cerebral position and a technique instincts position that I'm not ready to say he's going to get there and he's going to be the best linebacker in the league. But in terms of traits and ability, there's nothing more you could ask for in Devin White.
Well, as a result of how the guys performed up front, the secondary certainly benefited as a result, especially if you go to the Super Bowl when you don't have to blitz and you can get home with 4 guys on Patrick Mahomes. Something tells me Todd Bowles wasn't complaining. But I think, John, when you look at this Bucs secondary, I think a lot of people from maybe the outside don't realize it's still very young. I mean, all these guys were drafted between 18, 19, and 20, yet the continuity factor seems to help them entering this year again. And I think if you talk about Devin White at the linebacker position, then we've got to talk about how impressive Antoine Winfield Jr. was at the safety position and what he was able to put forth as a rookie.
Yeah, and Jason Light deserves a lot of credit, right? I mean, that is the secondary is kind of it's like quarterback on defense to me. Like if you have your secondary right and your quarterback right, you're probably going to win a lot of games if you can do anything else competent, and you could put O-line in that discussion too, but even O-line, to me, it's like a unit thing. Like if you can get your unit, look at Buffalo, I mean, they don't have a lot of stars, but they've got their unit to play well for years now, and to get better together, they know how to play together. And so, like, if you can get those units, I think, in place, you're going to have a lot of success. And the Bucs had horrible secondaries for years and years and years. They just could not get it right. And Jason Light was just like, I'm going to draft these dudes until they all work, until we get a starting group. What I mean? Like some didn't work out. Vernon Hargreaves didn't work out. MJ Stewart didn't work out. Those guys were terrible. And then when they moved on from those guys, and midway through 2019, they said, we're cutting Vernon Hargreaves. We're not playing MJ Stewart anymore. They cut him in the offseason. They were like, we're done. These guys, we're playing Sean Murphy-Bunting. We're playing Jamel Dean. And if those guys suck, guess what? We're going to go to the draft next year and we're going to take more corners. That was their mindset. So he took Carlton Davis in the same draft as MJ Stewart. He'll be in his 4th year. He turned into a star last year, I think. People probably saw the Chiefs game, but that was a rough half. But everything else, he really just had an outstanding year. He put himself on the map for sure as a guy who's going to be a highly paid corner next year. If he has another good year, we'll see. Got to string those together. Sean Murphy-Bunting, it was a really tough regular season. He is mentally a warrior. He is what they want in terms of makeup, communication skills, smarts, instincts, all that kind of stuff. It just really wasn't coming together for him on the field. And then he got to the playoffs and had picks in 3 straight games, and I don't know what he is right now. I really don't. If you'd asked me last year going into the playoffs, I'd have said he's the weakest link on the team for sure in the starting lineup. Now I have no idea. We're going to see this year. We'll find out a lot about him. Jamel Dean is talented, but you guys saw the Giants game last year when the Bucs and Giants played. That guy should have given up 4 touchdowns in that game if Dan Jones could hit guys down the field. He just was biting on everything, and he has games like that where he could give up 200 yards in a game, and the next week he could have 3 picks. You just got to find some level ground with Jamel Dean. So biggest question mark on the Bucs going into the season is without a doubt the cornerback position. Carlton, I feel good about. The other 2 are question marks, talented as heck. You feel a lot better about him because Winfield's behind him and around him, and you know what he's capable of, and maybe he plays more in the slot this year. You feel a lot better because Jordan Whitehead took a huge step last year at strong safety, and Mike Edwards as the number 3 safety who can come in and make plays on the ball at free safety. You feel great about those guys. The progress they made last year. It's just, you're 23 and 35. You're not quite sure what to think about those guys at this point in time.
All right, John, final one from me. And, Jeff Eagles always tells us that when the weather is great and beautiful and sunny out, it's going to help special teams an awful lot. But I don't want to shortchange the fact that the Bucs have some pretty damn good kickers.
Oh, yeah, they do. And, with kickers, you really don't know. Not just because, it was great last year. That's all I'll say. I don't want to jinx anybody, but it's you just have no idea year to year how it's going to go. I will say Brad Suckup has had a pretty consistent year. The one year it was is he going to be in the league anymore? He was older and he had the injury in Tennessee and only played 6 games. And that was really kind of the only question mark with him. When he's been healthy, he's pretty much always kicked it pretty well, but then, you're only as good as your last moment as a kicker. And so, he missed that kick before the playoffs that would have put my Steelers in the playoffs that year, so I'll always hold him. But no, he had a great year last year, and Bradley Pinion's been an awesome punter for this team, was the unsung hero of the Super Bowl, in my opinion. And so, they have a good battery, and they said, we've been through enough kicking woes. We're re-signing Ryan Suckup. Zach Triner's not going anywhere. Bradley Pinion's not going anywhere. We're keeping this special teams battery together because we have seen enough woes in the kicking game over the years with all their issues and all the kickers they've had, drafting them especially, to not want to go through that struggle again.
John, before we let you go, big picture question. You mentioned the biggest question mark on defense would be the other cornerback position opposite Carlton Davis. I want to extend it a little bit long. They would say that it's Super Bowl or bust in Tampa Bay, most people, because of the fact that they kept this team together. So what's the one element that you would say could hold this team back or be a reason why either they miss the playoffs or can't get back to the Super Bowl?
Other than injuries, which is a good disclaimer for everybody. I think it's scheme. Everybody comes different. When you win the Super Bowl, people spend the whole offseason looking at you different. Remember, the Bucs were 7-5 coming out of their bye week. It's not like they were on all the best teams' radars all year long with what they did. They weren't necessarily taken as seriously as all the other top teams all year. Now it's going to be different. Now everybody's going to give you your best game, and I know that's a cliche, but I definitely think it's true. I think everybody gets up for those games. So I think they can handle the emotional, mental part of it as players. I think they're a very mature room. There's a lot of leaders, a great mix of youth and veterans. You have Tom Brady. There is not going to be a focus problem, I don't think. That would be a lot of teams' concerns. Their concern is going to be schematically. Can they continue to adapt and grow? They had success last year, but it wasn't until after the bye week where they accepted some things that they weren't doing well and did them better. I don't think they did them as best they could do them. But play-action passing, you have to use it in today's NFL a lot, and Bruce Arians has always been near the bottom of the league in using play-action passing. He has some of the best concepts in the league with play-action passing. He just hasn't used it enough. They used it at a season high rate in the Super Bowl, and it was the reason why they're Super Bowl champions, in my opinion, offensively. So those things have to happen more often. There's other things on the offensive side of the ball. They have to get away from running as heavily as they do on first down. When they got away from that, they had success in the regular season when they threw more on first down. They got away from it a lot, and they threw more on first down after the bye week, and it was one of the big changes. Defensively, they really struggled over the second half of the year. It's hard to remember now, given how they played against the Chiefs, but they have to be able to be more than just a zone coverage team. When they went to press man, which fits all their personnel better, in my opinion, they were a more successful secondary and defense in the playoffs. They stunned teams by going to two high safeties. They've been the number one run defense in the league the last 2 years. You have to start moving a guy out of the box and play two high safeties because everybody is going to come out throwing the ball against you next year. You have to just accept that and make that change now so you don't have to adapt to it in midseason. Yeah, you might be the seventh best run defense in the league. Big deal. If you can shut down the pass better, you are going to be a more successful defense, period. So they need to kind of be able to accept some of those things and make sure they are adapting and changing. It's the reason they won the Super Bowl, because they did that way better when the playoffs started than they done during the regular season. Todd Bowles especially totally changed what he did and floored teams by changing what he'd always done. If they can keep growing like that as a staff, they're going to have answers for people as people give them their A games. If they can't, they'll get stagnant and somebody will catch them in the playoffs.
So the Bucs, the latest team to try to pull off the feat of back-to-back Super Bowl champs heading into 2021. He is John Ledyard, who covers the team for Pewter Report, also does a great job covering the NFL Draft. John, can't thank you enough. Greatly appreciate the time and the insight, and we look forward to talking down the road. Thanks again.
Thanks, John. Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Always great talking with you guys, and have a great season.